over at the book table, and Zionism, the Myth, the Lies, the Crimes by Abayomi Azikiwe, yours truly, and David Soul. Here is also available for $4. Text from a series of classes that were done, interestingly enough, a decade and a half ago, and also in 2014, a decade ago. And I think it still stands up pretty good in terms of what is going on now in the region. Also, we want to announce that on January the 20th, it's not only Inauguration Day for Donald Trump, but it's also the federal holiday to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And for the last 22 years, we have organized the annual Detroit MLK Day Rally and March. This year it's going to be at the St. Matthew St. Joseph's Episcopal Church. That is going to be located at Woodward Avenue and Holbrook, 8850 Woodward Avenue in the what used to be called the North End neighborhood of Detroit. It starts at noon. There will be a host of speakers from the community, artists, poets, dancers, musicians who come together every year to honor the social justice, anti-war, and of course, anti-poverty legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the legacy that is often ignored by the corporate press here in this country. We meet every Monday, but with the holidays coming up, this will be our final official meeting of the year until January the 6th. Just want to remind people that we meet every Monday. These are hybrid meetings. We meet here at the office as well as through Zoom. So we want to thank everybody for coming out. And I want to talk about our speakers. We have Dr. Ismail Noor, who is here. He's a veteran activist in this area and internationally. He was born in Palestine and was a victim of the Nakba as well as the 1967 so-called Six-Day War. He's a sociologist. He's going to be talking about settler colonialism and the dismantling of Palestine. We also have with us here Julia Kassem, who is a former student at, I believe, American University in Beirut, right? And she's a correspondent for PressTV as well as Al Mayadeen. People should look up her articles. She has one that was published a couple of days ago on what's going on in Syria, which we hope to reprint in Fighting Words. Also, we have Joseph Mchahwar, who is Syrian-American, graduate of Wayne State University, and also activist on anti-imperialism and Arab solidarity issues. And of course, online, we have Tommy Cavanaugh of the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, who is now facing disciplinary charges from the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee because he dared question Vice President Kamala Harris when she was in town running for president as to why they were supporting genocide in Gaza. And that got him in a lot of trouble there. So there's supposed to be a hearing coming up, I believe, is it this week or, yeah. So we're trying to mobilize support for him in that regard. Okay, well, he'll tell us about it. He's online anyway. Okay, so I believe that's everyone who's going to speak tonight. And first, I want to bring up Dr. Noor. Let's have a warm welcome for him.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry I have a cold for the past few days, but today I feel much better than yesterday. And that goes to my wife who fed me well and did the lemonade for me and what have you. So I thank her for that. Again, my name is Ismail Noor. I am an old-time activist in Michigan, I should say, because I was in Lansing, Michigan first, and then I moved to this area in Dearborn. I was born in Palestine in 1949, so my age is almost equal to the age of the Zionist entity in Palestine. I consider myself as a Nakba survival, although I wasn't born before the Nakba. And although my family were not living in the 1948 areas, but that defines in different way who are the survivors of Nakba and who are not. So there are three types of survivals. The first is the ones who were evicted by force, expelled from Palestine, and those mounted to almost 800,000 Palestinians spread all over the Middle East. And those who had their livelihood in the 1948, and because of the Nakba, they lost that livelihood. And my family was one of those. So that is why I consider myself as a Nakba survivor. And the third type is those who were working in the 1948 Palestine, and because of the Nakba, they lost their jobs and moved back to their homes and so forth. So all these are Nakba survivors. Anyway, let me stress one point. I am not a historian, and sorry if I sound like one. I am a sociologist, a student of sociology, and that is how I looked at the situation from that point of view. So now I look into your faces and eyes, and I can see that you are very concerned about what's going on in that area of the world. Some disbelieve, some shocked, some sad, some angry, some mad, and what have you. I am not here to defend anybody or to give you political analysis of the future. What happened, happened. So from my point of view, put that behind you and move on, because the last chapter of what's going on not yet written. And the people who will write that chapter is the people of that area, regardless of the will and might of all those international colonial powers that are now controlling the situation. And also regardless of the regional power who still think that they can benefit from what's going on in there. In particular, I mean Turkey. This particular regional power once more is committing a great mistake for its future, because I think that the next online is Turkey. No matter how you slice it, this is what is coming, in my opinion. Now, let's be frank. This is a major setback for the resistance. Whatever resistance you look at, whether in Palestine or in Lebanon or in Iraq or in Yemen. So just today, they started bombing Sana'a. Today, the colonial, the imperialist power of the United States and Kingdom starting to do that. So I am not going to talk about why and how and who to blame and all of that. I am trying to get you back to the very first point, to point one, actually, where the struggle started. I myself was born into the struggle. From the first time that I opened my eyes and my mind, I found myself into the struggle of Palestine. So I continued up to now without hesitating. And if time goes back, I would choose the same path again and again and again, because that is how we can write the last chapter of this struggle. Now, I have a PowerPoint presentation to show you. I am sorry, it is crowded, has many slides, but I don't need to talk about all the slides that is included in there. I just want to focus on a couple things. Now, this is a mouse, can work. Just let me talk about the map first, or maybe. As you see on the screen, this is the map of Europe, West Asia, and Africa. And this is the point that we're talking about. This is where the struggle started and continue. This is Syria, nowadays Lebanon, and Jordan, and occupied Palestine. All these used to be one piece. It's called or referred to as the province of Syria. That is for centuries, since 660 BC, since the Islam, Muhammad came as a prophet. That was a one piece divided in 1990s, in 1900 actually, after World War I. Many governments governing this area since then. I mean, from the Muslims to the Christians to what have you. The area is not new to invasion, is not new to colonialism, is not new to occupation. In fact, I don't want to go back in history, but in recent history, let's say from the 18th century and coming to these days, that area came under the control of what the European called the Crusaders. The Crusaders occupied that area for more than 200 years until Salah ad-Din and the Mamluk dynasty kicked them out. So this is another try, but this time unlike the first time, Europe sent their army into the region. This time, they sent a foreign entity into this region to become a settler colonial area or colonial settler area. The idea of occupying Palestine and colonizing it, in my opinion, was never a Jewish idea. It was born in Europe, cherished by the European colonial powers, and they tried it for one time, two times, three times, until this day where we have the Zionist entity in Palestine. The Britons, one of the Britons said, creating a foreign entity in Palestine is cheaper than going into a war every 10 years to control the area. I have a news for that guy. It wasn't cheaper. They created the foreign entity, but yet they continue to have wars in that area every 10 years or so. And what's going on now is an indication of that. So I want to talk a little bit about the origin of Semite and those who are not Semite. This dichotomous that is used for 100 years, 200 years, and it is not an exact science because people mingled with each other. There is no pure race or what have you, and even race is an issue that is questionable and in doubt. But the origin of that is actually came from religion. You know that this area is the home for the three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And those three religions cross reference on this, that it was started with the Prophet Noah, N-O-A-H. In Arabic, we called him Nuh, and he is a prophet. So he had three sons, some say four, but the three sons that are known to us were on the ark that he built before the flood that took everybody else. And it is said that the ark carried all kinds of animals and plants and what have you, besides 70 men and women, and Noah and his three sons. This is actually, you can find this in the three books, Torah, Al-Injil, and in Quran. They reference that. Let me start to, how can I do that? I mean, how can I, I need to see myself. I can talk without it. and
Somebody.
Okay, don't worry about it. Okay. Is it now? Okay. So what I am saying is colonialism is not new in the world, but it has a devastating effect on those who are colonized, including my people in Palestine and in the area, in the Syrian province, as we called it. I really need to learn how to do that. Okay. Those are just a few slides that I added while I am trying to get to here. You remember this slide, this picture of Netanyahu at the United Nations, and in there actually he announced the war to continue, and he announced that he is going to change the landscape of the Middle East. And today he just said that I promised you this, and now it is happening. As you see in this slide, as I mentioned, Turkey. Now, Turkey benefited from what is going on right now in Syria. Before just it happened, Turkey was announced that it is becoming a mediator in the ceasefire in Gaza, which means that Hamas is going to give up the provisions that or whatever they want from the ceasefire to get from the ceasefire. And also Turkey just announced 2 days ago that Erdogan met with the Somali and Ethiopian presidents or rulers, and they made up their relationship in that. So in that, he is negating Egypt, actually. And that is a recipe for the conflict to continue in different ways. This is the map that I wanted to show you, but I could not find it at the time. Now we have the map there. This is the area that we'll talk about. This is, if you see in here, this is the genealogy of Adam, where his sons and so forth. And this is Noah in here with the arch. And then this is Noah family. And those his sons, Sham, Japheth, and Ham. This is actually pronounced Sam nowadays. So this is the most important one among the three. In Quran, they talked about a fourth son that is not named, but he drowned because he did not want to get on the ark with his so-called father. And God told us that he was not the son of Noah, although his wife carried him and delivered him, which means that it is not the son of Noah. This is the arch. And this is Sam or Shem. And this is the area where all these three, everyone went to a different place. This is Sem or Sam, and this is the area it covers. So the people of this area are Semite, whether now Muslims or Christians or Jews. So that is to take that out of the use. This is Ham in Africa, and this is Japheth in Europe and elsewhere. So that is just to end that. Those are the Semite or Semitic languages that are the most important, the most common ones. And this is the three religions. And you can read on those from Torah, Old Testament, Talmud, Bible, and Quran. Now, colonizing around the world, as we know it, some people take a point, a cut point actually, which is 1492. That is the start, as a start of colonialism around the world. But regardless that colonialism started much before that, but this is referred to the Columbus, who came into what they called it the New World, discovering, although there were millions of people in this new world. By the way, in 1994, there was a celebration of 500 years of Columbus. And University of Michigan did the celebration and had so many lectures and what have you around that thing. And there had a historian from Minnesota State University, and I was there. I was listening in the audience. He said Columbus did his voyage for purpose of going around the world to reach Jerusalem and occupy that. So that is after the failure of the crusade before that in the region. And also he said that the Portuguese went around the Cape Hope, South Africa, and came into now what is Yemen, into the Red Sea for the purpose of occupying Mecca. That's what he said. So they can trade Mecca with Jerusalem, as if Christianity was born in the United States, while Christianity was born in Palestine. Jesus Christ, was a Palestinian, and he was the first resistant ever on this earth. So that is the history of colonialism around the world. And I want to leave you with some pictures of that, how it affects the colonized. This is from America. This is from France, in Morocco, and in Algiers. This is in Algiers, France. This is in Algiers also. This is in France, in Morocco. The most brutal colonizer ever is this Belgium. Look at those pictures. They said that they killed 10 million people in there, in Congo. We're familiar with this picture from Vietnam also. And do you know why they call it colonial settler? Because there are two kinds of colonialism. One is colonial settler that we're talking about, and one is colonial without settler. So colonial settler is when they send their bodies, their people, and stay in the country that is colonized. That happened in the United States, happened in Canada, happened in Australia, and in other areas of the world, two more areas in the world. That's why it is called colonial settler. And they are trying to do that in Palestine. That is why, because they did not succeed yet to the degree that there is no fighting, we call it a project. Then it becomes colonial, settler, Zionist project. Those are the elements that goes into the phrase. Now this is Palestine, and how the mandate. Look at these pictures. This is from 1948. Okay. Look at these pictures. This is current from Gaza. Now, look at this. Imagine that this is a group of Palestinians carrying weapons like that. What would the word say? Look at this too. This is settlers, Zionist settlers in Palestine. That's so who came up with the idea of colonizing Palestine? I want to finish in this. It was Napoleon Bonaparte when he invaded Egypt and tried to invade Palestine itself in 1798 and 1799, and he was defeated on the wall of Akka. So he went back to France and called on the called quote unquote the Jews to go back to their home land in Palestine. And the idea died until Britain took that mission on itself, and even the United States contributed to that. In 1848, there was a priest called George Bush, who was the grandfather of George Bush, the president. And he wrote two books, one on Muhammad and another book, which are just a very negative connotations about Muhammad and Islam and what have you. And he called for again the Jews to go back to their homeland, and the Navy sent a commission to Palestine in 1948, 100 years, in 1848, 100 years before the creation or the so-called independence of the Zionist entity. That commission is just to figure out how or what in Palestine worth to have it changed into a Zionist entity rather than a country within the world. So we came to the eve of World War I, and World War I, Turkey and Germany and their alliance were defeated, and their belongings were divided among the winners, Britain and France. And the Arabs considered with the Turks also defeated, so they did not, nobody asked them their opinion of what the future of their land is going to be. So that is the way that this struggle started against the Zionism and Zionist entity. Then in 1905, the Prime Minister of Britain convened a conference called by his name, or Imperial Conference, Henry Campbell Bannerman Conference. Lasted 2 years, and it ended with a recommendation based on a recommendation by a recommendation about to divide the Arab world, to create a colony, settler colony in Palestine. So this vast, wide open area of what is called the Arab world will not be able to reunite from Morocco to the Gulf, and because of the resources that they have, the same language, the same religion almost, and so forth, and this is why they recommended that. That paved the way for the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and that paved the way for the Balfour Agreement. And that is the start of the struggle. Now, I want to skip the rest of the slides and talk about my own experience. As a child, I opened my eyes on the struggle, as said, and witnessed lots of atrocities, wars, crimes, and what have you. The ones that I did not see, I heard about and read about, and so forth. So from 1949 to up to now, we have witnessed all these atrocities. The most significant part of that is in 1967. I was a teenager, 16 years or 17 years old, and the Zionist occupation forces came to my town and used the speaker on at the mosque and called everybody, the people of my town, which is called Anabta, to come back from the fields and everything is okay and we settled. You are under the control of the Zionist entity and so forth. So they did, people did. And just 4 hours ago, 4 hours after that, they used the same loudspeakers on the mosque and they called on everybody to line on the highway which crosses the town in the middle that goes between Nablus and Tul Karim. And if anybody does not adhere to that, he will be shot or she will be shot to death in the house. So we did. I mean, most of the people did. They lined on the street, on the south and the north side of the street. And just a few hours after that, the Egged Bus Company, which is the major company in the Zionist entity, started to come and line up. So we were forced to ride in the buses, and I was one of those who were forced to do that. I had 69 people on that bus, my family and relatives and so forth, and most of them were way over 60 or 70 years old, except the three. Myself and two cousins were children at 16, 17 years old. I was able to communicate with the soldiers. Each bus has 3 soldiers on it, fully armed, and they communicated with us in English. And guess what? This is my experience. Their English is or was American accent. So when the leaders of the region said America was fighting against us, it is true. It's true then, and it's true now. So I continued in the path of the principles of the struggle up to now, and I will continue. I recommend to the young people to stay, again, to stay firm on course, and things will change, especially in Syria. Things will change. Now I will end with this from Martin Luther King Jr. I had a dream, just like him. Do you have a dream? What is your dream? My dream is to go back. I was asked by Katie Hilber when she interviewed me, what is the victory for you? I said, victory for me is when my people go back freely to Palestine, to their homes and towns, and practice their self-determination, and they can decide then what the future of Palestine is. That is the victory for me. So that is my dream. If you have a dream, let's dream together and stay together, because that is the future. Look, the Middle East is in a mess, but also in here is a mess. So the idea of freedom and liberation is one, whether in Palestine or in the United States or in South America or even in China. The Zionist entity will never agree to a Palestinian independent state, even if that state is proposed to be in China, because that will contradict their narratives and lead to their end. Thank you very much, and we'll answer the questions.
Let's thank Dr. Noor for that presentation. And so glad you could be here tonight. Shows your determination. All right, we want to bring up Julia Kassem. She is a friend of ours and had went to university in Lebanon, and she is now writing very great analytical articles on what's happening in West Asia in PressTV as well as Al Mayadeen television. Let's have a warm welcome for Julia.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me? All right, so in the last few weeks, we witnessed the horrific collapse of Syria. But this, at the same time, as paradoxical as it sounds, the collapse of imperialism and the collapse of Zionism are coming at an even faster rate. So what was the Zionist entity's whole goal in the collapse of Syria? Joe's going to go more into those internal dynamics. But the counterinsurgency, and I don't say insurgency because the purpose of inundating Syria with a bunch of terrorist groups backed by Turkey firsthand and then backed by the US and the Zionist entity in their ultimate project is to, one, destabilize one of the last bastions of Arab socialism and sovereignty in the region. But more importantly, it came as part of a long term campaign that the US and Israel have done over and over again in order to isolate the Palestinian resistance and Hezbollah from Syria. Syria is where the resistance has been given refuge. It has been given material support. It has its route lines through Syria. And following the victory of Hezbollah against Israel on November 27th, the Zionist entity in the US did not wait more than 10-15 hours to launch their assault on Syria. This is very intentional. Now, the project in Syria was a plan in the making for over a year, actually. They had been planning it meticulously. They had been bombing the specific research centers in Syria that helped produce weapons for both Syria and the resistance as well. And for over 6 or 7 years, there's been an intensified aerial bombardment campaign against these research sites, whether it's the one in Aleppo or the Mesaf Center over Homs, or some of the other sites that also where weapons are produced, where stores are in the south of Syria as well. And if you've noticed, and I detail this more in my writing, these are the exact sites that the rebels were attacking as they had commenced with their counterinsurgency, beginning with Aleppo, downwards to Homs, and then commenced with the collapse of Damascus as they also repositioned southward in the southern areas of the country. So it's no secret at this point that the NATO-backed rebel groups, so-called rebel groups, Takfiri groups, I call them, they are the ground forces, and this is proven, for the Zionist entity's air attacks. The Zionist entity in the spring, it published a report in one of its think tanks, the Alma Center. They had said that, our time is running out. They're getting their asses kicked in Gaza. They're getting their asses kicked in South Lebanon, as they have been in the past 2 months of their siege there. They wanted to go to where they saw it was the supply, the source of the weapons of the resistance and the support line of the resistance, which is Syria, and basically decapitate it. So the resistance has played a masterful war of attrition campaign that is slowly exhausting and inflicting a death upon 1,000 cuts against the Zionist entity. We have seen for the fourth time, the Zionist entity has renewed a siege on the north of Gaza, committed a genocide within a genocide, wiping everyone out of it, but they've still failed to push the resistance out. The resistance still is ambushing them in Jabalia. The resistance is still blowing up their tanks in the north, in Beit Lahia. The resistance is still firing rockets actually from the north, and they just did today and yesterday. And then the same in South Lebanon, they faced a massive defeat. So, you know, in spite of the genocide, which is all they're really able to do, they have failed in any of their goals to break the resistance, either in Gaza or in Lebanon, or to have any kind of, you know, settle anyone in Gaza or in Lebanon. And they failed to bring their settlers back to the north. In the past campaigns, it was the martyr, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he came to become the Secretary General of Hezbollah in 1992, it was him that actually pushed the resistance past the borders of Lebanon from a defensive to a more, you know, into the occupied Palestine borders. And he was the one who actually, you know, pioneered that push for the resistance to fire on the settlers in the north and in the occupied Golan. And since then, the Zionist entity has to pretty much bribe people to live in the north. So they've lost the north. And the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, has expanded its range of fire past Haifa in this last resistance siege. And the unified resistance campaign, as we can see, they've worked in coordination masterfully the whole time. They've lost control of pretty much all of the country that they're occupying. So, of course, given that the Zionist entity does not have the capacity, both with its settler population or militarily, for long wars of attrition, they began this siege on Syria, basically in coordination with the United States and Turkey. And like thinking about Turkey's role in this, Turkey had taken the role, especially in the Obama administration, of being like the neo-Ottoman comprador to carry out the US's plans of weakening the resistance while also providing a lot of soft power to the Arab world, especially to Lebanon and Palestine, as sort of an ideological or political alternative to the resistance. That's why you see Erdogan do a lot of lip service on Palestine. And I see that the neo-Ottoman position, the neo-Ottoman propaganda has also reached the pro-Palestine movement to a degree in the US. So that's why you see the line on Syria and almost like the lack of analysis in terms of the solidarity with the resistance that existed back in the Vietnam War era with the demonstrators and with the movement in the US. You see that essentially lost now. So I think that there are definitely a lot of ideological connections with the US's employment of kind of the neo-Ottoman strategy, and how that essentially like brainwashes our people, but also people in the solidarity movement in the US. Basil al-Arash, who is a Palestinian revolutionary, was martyred in a firefight in 2017. He wrote in his book that the fundamental problem of the pro-Palestine movement in general in the US is that they don't see the Zionist entity as an illegitimate entity. Like the Zionism is still normalized to a degree. So it becomes a human rights struggle instead of a liberation struggle. And so that's essentially kind of almost like the liberalization of what is supposed to be a liberation movement and a solidarity with the liberation movement. And solidarity is meant to be, solidarity with those that are resisting on the ground. And this is why we see Samidun being targeted. This is why we see organizations being targeted that actually build a bridge between those struggles on the ground and the struggle here at home. So anyway, going back to the role of these Turkish-funded US and Israeli-backed rebel groups. Lately, the US, especially in the last 3 years, it has phased out Daesh and al-Nusra and Free Syrian Army, and has reorganized and emboldened Hayat Tahrir al-Sham because they wanted to keep the focus on Syria and on the resistance in Lebanon in order to basically keep a more localized project, because the previous counterinsurgency campaign, the previous war in Syria, it had got too messy, it had expanded too much. So there was as we could see, we remember Jolani first wearing a suit and going on PBS Frontline in this new like rebranded way that they were propagating him. They were sending us signals then that this was going to be their new tool, essentially. So that's what we see at Hayat Tahrir Sham now, is they're the foot soldiers of empire. They're the foot soldiers of the Zionist entity on the ground. And as I've mentioned, since the siege that began not 15 hours after the victory in Lebanon, they have specifically targeted these research centers. They shot and killed the director of the Aleppo Research Center. They had used with American intelligence. They had pretty much blinded the Syrian army. They had disrupted all of the communication systems. And with Ukrainian drones, they bombed the Mesa Research Center on December 4th. So you can almost see like the NATO and the US are directly engineering new tactics of warfare. And based on Israel's admission just 6 months prior that they were not able to be successful in 6 years of attempting assassination and bombing the locations in Syria that they wanted to, they needed the groundwork to come in and do it for them. There are reports that from the UN from 2014 that detail the Free Syrian Army's coordination with the Zionist entity. They had laid out the blueprints for them in south of Syria. So there is a long history of cooperation between these groups and the Zionist entity. Now, a lot of people are wondering if this has essentially cut off the resistance, because there's a lot of lack of hopes being spread. There's a lot of, defeatism. I think that, that's unfounded. Like, we have a long history of resistance in the region. And the resistance is incredibly adaptable. So in 2015, it looked like Syria was in a worse position militarily than it was today. And of course, there are different reasons why it fell so quickly than it did back then. But militarily speaking, there were always scenarios that were drafted out, in case of different things taking place on the ground that may be targeted at the resistance in this ongoing counterinsurgency campaign. Haj Kassem Soleimani, who was martyred in 2020, he instituted the mechanisms for self-sufficiency amidst all members of the axis of resistance. Yemen and Gaza in 2014, especially, Lebanon. He made basically all of them are self-sufficient. We don't know, obviously, to the extent of what, but both, even in Gaza and in Lebanon especially, there are rockets being self-produced, drones being self-produced. There is the storage is domestic now, and right now in Lebanon, there's just going to be a situation like there was in Yemen for a long time, militarily speaking, of course, and in Gaza, where even though the routes, the obvious routes are now cut off, but I mean, they were being bombed anyway by the Zionist entity. The Zionist entity was bombing humanitarian aid and grain and food supplies that were going from Iran and Syria into Lebanon during its siege in 2020. So I think that there were always the mechanisms for, transporting anything alternatively in the event of a collapse on Syria. This was planned a long time ago, beginning with the original US plans to decouple Lebanon and Lebanese resistance from Syria post 2005. So kind of looking at the US's plans in its 2-month-long siege on Lebanon, its goals were the same as they were in 2006 and in 2000, but especially 2006 and also post 2019 during the US engineered economic crisis. This is to isolate Hezbollah politically as well as militarily, and basically oust them from holding any kind of salience within their community. They targeted a lot of the community institutions that Hezbollah built for its people, such as the Qard al-Hassan Credit Union Center, the Dar al-Hawra. It was a low-cost clinic. So they had built things for their community. They had built things that had transcended the parasitic capitalist system that Lebanon is built on, essentially. So not only were those sanctioned in the engineered economic crisis and color revolution of the post-2019 time, but also these were the exact sites that were bombed by Israel in the last siege. So they intentionally were bombing all of the infrastructure, both in Gaza and in Lebanon, that can sustain any sort of sovereignty for the people. So of course, its military pretext was that it was a pretext. So as Ismail said, the purpose of these compradors essentially is for the colonial powers that are as arrogant as they are to think that there is instead of a war every 10 years, we can just basically institute compradors to do the work for us. Well, they have underestimated the resistance. The resistance has not stopped, not just since the rise of Hezbollah and the rise of the Palestinian resistance, but even before that. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah's predecessor was Sayyid Musa Sadr. Sayyid Musa Sadr's precedent was Sayyid al-Sharaf ad-Din, who actually worked the predecessors of the Lebanese resistance in the time of the French and British occupation. They cooperated and collaborated together to resist the colonial occupations back then. There was a joint struggle across the Syrian front and within the Lebanese front and within the Palestinians that were always cooperating across history. During the partition of 1920, they all met in Wadi Hajar to put their demand that they wanted to live in unity as part of a Syrian state, a pan-Syrian state, not as a colonial partition. And it was the Zionists and the British who drew that line. They drew it up to the Litani, ironically, where Israel's 1701 line is. And the French wanted a concession because they had kind of some comprador groups. They had a relationship with the Maronites in Lebanon. So they proposed that the line is where the dividing line essentially is today. But yeah, this basically goes back in time. So as long as there is occupation, there is resistance, and there will continue to be resistance. We did see the collapse of Iraq, just very similar to the collapse of Syria, done for the same purposes over 10, 15, 20 years ago. Also to isolate the anti-Zionist resistant fronts in Iran and in Lebanon and in Palestine. But that gave birth essentially to one of the strongest fronts of the resistance today, which is the Hashd al-Shabi. So I really believe that we're going to see the same come up in Syria. Yeah, as long as there's occupation, there's resistance.
Just wanted to remind people that the title of the article is How HTS, which is the group now that's supposed to be in charge in Syria, but we know who actually is in charge. how HTS ground strategy intersected with Israel's project in Syria by Julia Kassem. That's from Al Mayadeen English. So please check out the article and our other articles. Right now, we want to bring up Joe Mchahwar, and he will give us further analysis of the situation in Syria and the region as a whole. Let's have a warm welcome.
Good evening, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends. It's really great to be with you here tonight. And, you know, the war in Syria has been a really divisive conflict for people all around the world. We saw the Palestinian solidarity movement split over it several times, and the anti-war movement in general. And for the good of solidarity with Palestine and the anti-war movement, we need to focus on what unites us. And what unites us is a desire for a united, sovereign, and prosperous Syria going forward, and a united, sovereign, and prosperous Arab world, and an end to these endless imperialist wars that have plagued the region and plagued the world. After nearly 13 years of total war in Syria, hundreds of thousands have died. Millions have fled the country, and much of the country stands in ruins today. Today, what remains of Syria is partitioned between three of the many powers that were direct participants in the war. And you can see on this map up here in the blue-green is the Turkish occupation of Syria. Here in the darker yellow, orange, that's where the US occupies much of Syria through the Syrian Democratic Forces. And much of Turkey's sphere of influence is also under these groups that have taken control of Damascus. And then, of course, the ever expanding Israeli invasion into Syria. Within these areas of occupation influence, there are many different factions and interests. But with the free fall collapse of the Syrian state, a common enemy for them is gone. And it's really laying the basis for continued conflict in Syria. Now that they're not united against fighting the government, it's very likely we'll see them fight each other, and we'll see new groups rise up, groups coalesce, and continue the war. To understand the prospects of Syria's future, both inside Syria, regionally, and internationally, we need to look at these zones of occupation and influence and the players within them. So right here, you can see this is Netanyahu on the occupied Golan Heights giving a victory speech last Sunday, the day after the fall of Damascus. He said, "This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but is also fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is the direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran. Assad's main supporters. It sets off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and this oppression." He also said later, the Golan Heights will forever be an inseparable part of the state of Israel. The genocidal Zionist entity has long played a role in destabilizing Syria. I mean, over its entire existence, it's been in a state of war with Syria. And Syria was one of the few countries to refuse making peace on stolen land with the Zionists until their land was liberated, until Palestine was liberated. And as Julia mentioned, and has been mentioned elsewhere, it's been a very vital supply line, host of the resistance for most of its existence. And Israel has played a major role in this war against Syria over the last 13 years. This is a photo of Netanyahu at a field hospital where they were treating fighters in Syria inside of the occupied Golan Heights. Israeli officials have admitted to supplying millions of arms to fighters in Syria. Hundreds of Zionist airstrikes have targeted civilian and military infrastructure over the course of the war. And, you know, it's just egregious things you can't even imagine. What sticks out to me when that massive earthquake happened in Turkey and Syria last year, Israel bombed Aleppo's airport twice to stop humanitarian aid from coming into Syria. And so it's kind of hard to see, but this is a map of the current incursion. This area here and down here is where they've expanded from the occupied Golan Heights. Today, they've seized more than 370 square kilometers of Syrian land in addition to what they have. These are very strategically important areas. They're full of water and other resources. And now today, Israeli tanks stand at the gates of Damascus, just 20 kilometers from the Syrian capital and 15 kilometers from the highway connecting Damascus to Lebanon. Israel captured Syria's highest mountain and one of the highest mountains in the region, Mount Hermon. And you can see it overlooks Lebanon, Jordan, and has a huge vantage over the entire region, in addition to the resources it has. You know, with land, you can have the hope that it will be recaptured, but the untold billions of dollars in Syria's infrastructure that's been destroyed is not something that you can just rebuild so easily. This airstrike in Tartus yesterday caused a 3 magnitude earthquake. It was that large. You could see the mushroom cloud for hundreds of kilometers. And they've done over 800 airstrikes since the fall of the government in Damascus last Saturday. They've destroyed a huge amount of Syria's military capabilities, its military production, and a large amount of civilian infrastructure. Without this vital means of self-defense, whoever governs Syria, in whole or in part, will struggle to challenge the foreign influence that's in Syria right now and effectively control the country going forward. So to another zone of occupation right now, Turkey controls much of northern Syria. They've played a long role in the war against Syria. They're the second largest army in the US-led NATO alliance. They've, for years, funneled thousands of fighters into Syria. They directly collaborated with ISIS to steal Syria's oil during the war. And they've also facilitating the looting of Syria's industrial infrastructure. Factories in Aleppo and other parts of Syria were taken down and put on trucks and driven into Turkey. The threat of Turkish annexation of Syrian lands is very clear. And many of the occupied territories occupied by Turkey, they've already introduced Turkish lira, Turkey's currency, into Syria. My dad was talking to his neighbor in Aleppo immediately after it was taken by HTS. And he said they were already changing to using the Turkish lira in the economy in Syria just before the government fell, within days of taking it. And the Turkish commercial interests in Syria are very large, and they don't want a competitive Syria. You know, they want a Syria that's deindustrialized and beholden to them. And of course, it's been talked about for many years. There was a pipeline planned from Qatar all the way to Europe through Syria that the Syrian government rejected in 2009. And this is a part of NATO's plan to cut off Europe permanently from Russian gas. And so, you know, these interests in Syria span, you know, decades and are looking far towards the future. And the patronage of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Syrian National Army, and other groups in Syria will definitely give Turkey a lot of sway over what happens in Damascus with the new authorities. And of course, we get to the US occupation. The US has played a decades-long role in destabilizing Syria. For decades, they've supported armed opposition groups in the country predating the war. They've supported Israeli wars against Syria and legitimized their annexation of the Golan Heights. And this is this war in Syria has been planned for so long. In 2003, American General Wesley Clark revealed that he saw a classified memo after 9/11 with the plan for a regional war. He said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq, and then Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off with Iran." And this memo was 10 years before the start of the unrest and eventually the war in Syria. And in the war in Syria, the US has supported all different kinds of groups, and it's directly participated with its air force and ground forces, along with the colonial powers of Europe, such as the UK and France. In 2012, the CIA began Operation Timber Sycamore, which involved funneling billions of dollars of arms and training fighters to fight in Syria to overthrow the state. And on this slide, you can see a 2012 leaked email from then State Department official Jake Sullivan, who's now the National Security advisor to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And he said, Al-Qaeda, he says AQ here, is on our side in Syria. Though the US has claimed to fight ISIS or Daesh in Syria, it really used it as a pretext to invade and occupy the country. Many of their arms, a lot of their supplies have ended up in the hands of those groups. In reality, it's a way for the United States to get their foothold in Syria and get their hands on Syria's resources. For the better part of a decade, the US has occupied the eastern side of the Euphrates River over here through the Syrian Democratic Forces, a coalition of groups including the separatist Kurdistan Workers' Party. Several US bases have been built here, and hundreds of US troops are stationed here. In this part of Syria is 90% of Syria's oil and the vast majority of its wheat production. That oil has been put on trucks by US forces, shipped through Iraq, and sold for nothing on the world market so that they could starve Syria for the last 10 years. The US control of Syria's oil has enabled them to, sorry, I'm getting a little lost here. Yeah, to deprive them of their basic needs. Because before the war, Syria was entirely self-sufficient in its energy and in its production of food. And since then, we've seen Syrians starving without power for hospitals or to produce anything in their country. And, you know, there's no indications that the US intend to leave Syria anytime soon. So control over these vital interests in Syria mean that whoever is in charge of the country will be beholden to the interests of the United States. You know, many are celebrating the fall of the Syrian state for a lot of different reasons, you know, and but I think it's very clear the future of Syria looks uncertain, if not very grim. What makes a state viable and sovereign? Define borders and the capability to defend them, control over its natural resources and economic development, the power to determine your relations with other states. Right now, Syria is lacking in all of those, and every passing day, it is losing more land. How can Syria be sovereign while the US controls 90% of its oil and the majority of its food production? While Turkey occupies, loots, and sponsors armed groups? While the Zionists take the most strategic land, water resources, and lay waste to every means of defense and production in the country, while their tanks are sitting outside Damascus. For the first time since its independence in 1946, Syria has returned to a truly colonial state. HTS, formerly Syria's Al-Qaeda branch, claims to control the country now, but its grip is very loose. There are countless armed organizations in Syria with thousands of fighters from around the world, from China, from Russia, from Europe, from other Arab states. And the presence of these fighters ensures that other countries will have excuses to intervene in Syria, and it will keep the country from being able to be a normal international player in diplomatic relations. And if these organizations make concerted attacks against religious minorities, as they did in the past and their political opponents, it's likely that new or armed organizations will rise to challenge them. And this is laying the framework to continue the war for much longer. As Julia mentioned and Ismail mentioned, Syria was vital for the survival of the resistance in the region. And it really puts the future of Lebanon, of Iraq, of Iran, and of course of Palestine into great question. You know, this is a very dynamic situation. And like Julia, I have a lot of faith in the capabilities of the resistance to adapt, but this is definitely a critical moment for them. Now Lebanon is besieged by the Zionists and by forces hostile to them on the other side. And Israel is creeping its way up the Lebanon border to cut it off themselves, not relying on proxies to do so. And HTS has refused to challenge the Zionist invasion of Syria that began last Sunday and has ordered the disbanding and disarming of Palestinian resistance factions that were able to call Syria a safe haven for decades. There's a real danger that the US, the Zionists, and their allies will use Syria as a base to attack its neighboring countries. It's likely they envision Syria's future on the Libyan model. 13 years ago, the United States backed armed groups and with their air force toppled the Libyan government of Gaddafi. And since then, we've seen 13 years of ceaseless war. Every country in the world, practically, every power that can, has some kind of interest in Libya. They can assassinate who they will. They can have open air slave markets. Their air forces operate freely, and they're able to loot Libya's oil. And I think it's, and of course, Libya was turned into a base to attack other countries in the region. And you know, if they get their way, this was their dream for Syria from the beginning. You know, ultimately, the US and the colonial powers of the world want West Asia and North Africa divided by sect, divided by ideology, and any division that they can come up with on their own. This region is a vital artery connecting 3 of the continents in the world. So much commerce goes through here, and you know, it's the dream of the United States, of the Zionists, of the colonial powers to keep this place on fire for the foreseeable future, so that it's a law of the jungle, and they can come in with their air force, their ground forces, they can supply weapons, and to keep us from having a prosperous future, to keep us from developing and taking our own destiny into our hands. This region is the linchpin of the colonial world that we live in. It's not in the interests of the Arab peoples or the American people to see the world destroyed and plundered this way. It's in all our interests to see a world of sovereignty and development, where West Asia is a hub of prosperity for all people, not a planet where we're marching towards absolute poverty and world war.
Thank you, Joe. And is Tommy, is he still online? Tommy, are you there from Milwaukee?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
All right, you want to go ahead? We just mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that you had come under attack for questioning the vice president about the genocidal policy of the White House in Gaza. You want to give us an update on the developments around that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's a wonderful meeting. I'm glad I was able to be here for it. I had my, so as was said, I was I was arrested and given a citation back in October because genocidal Vice President Harris came to my campus, and for some reason they allowed me into the room, and I I questioned her about her support for genocide. And after I was arrested and given a citation, now 2 months later, roughly, the university sent me a letter stating that I'm under non-academic misconduct investigation for disorderly conduct, and that my penalties can go all the way up to expulsion. I think it's unlikely that they will expel me, but since they've notified me that they could, they technically can. I'm a member of the Muslim Student Association and Students for Justice in Palestine out here, and they've put together a call to contact the Dean of Students office and ask that they drop the charges against me. I had my first meeting with the Dean of Students this morning, and so they told me that within 1 to 2 weeks, they'll reply to me with whatever my disciplinary actions will be. So anytime before I receive that notification, any sort of contact to the Dean of Students office at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee to tell them to drop the charges against Thomas Kavanaugh would be extremely helpful to keep me enrolled in the school and keep my trip clean as I am preparing to graduate and try to go to law school as well. I appreciate you letting me come on to speak. And just so it's on the recording, the email is dos@uwm.edu. If you could send an email of support for me, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you.
Could you just repeat that so we can write it down? And also the Wisconsin Bail Out the People movement on their website, they have a story about this, right?
Yes, absolutely. The Wisconsin Bail Out the People movement blog has been sharing updates on this, and there's just tons of great information in general. And they will keep updating that as anything develops as well. But that email for the office was dos@uwm.edu. And my name is Thomas Kavanaugh.
All right, thank you so much. And we're behind you 1,000%. We want to open up the floor for question and answers, comments, the last 20 minutes we have. But I just wanted to mention that what's happening with Thomas is not isolated. Here in Michigan, we have a case where Dana Nessel, Democratic Attorney General, has filed criminal charges against students involved in the Palestine Solidarity Movement at U of M as well as Wayne State. And we know what happened in those encampments back in the spring at Wayne State. It was busted up violently by the Wayne State Police and the Detroit Police, working in conjunction with Dan Gilbert's private police, City Shield Security Services, which is still occupying the Wayne State campus as we speak. And also in Virginia, there were two Palestinian-American students who were involved, in Palestine solidarity activity, and their home was raided. They weren't arrested, but their electronic equipment was confiscated. Laptops and cell phones were confiscated. A correspondent for Electronic Intifada, the website, one of the primary sources on the situation in Palestine, Asa Winstanley, he's in England. He had his home raided 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. He wasn't arrested, but the laptop was confiscated. Cell phones, smartphones were confiscated, and they want to know, who his sources are in regard to the work they do over Electronic Intifada. So this is an ongoing process, and it seems as if it will get worse under the incoming administration. They've already said they're going to go after their enemies, and that's going to be some of us in this room. Some of the first people they're going to move on are going to be people who support Palestine, who support the struggle of people who are oppressed and exploited throughout the world. And I just wanted to mention that the struggle for African liberation and Arab liberation has historically been interlinked. And you look at people like Gamal Abdel Nasser, the former president of Egypt, when it was the United Arab Republic with Syria, worked closely with people like Kwame Nkrumah, during the 1950s and 1960s. And then you also had the Palestine resistance movement, the PLO, and others who have worked closely with the African National Congress and SWAPO, their military operations. In fact, a year ago, it was the ANC-led government in South Africa that brought the Zionist regime to the International Court of Justice and charged them with genocide. And there was a hearing almost a month later, which is almost unprecedented in terms of international legal proceedings. And they got a favorable ruling saying that their charges of genocide against the Zionist state were plausible. And yet, the United States said that the lawsuit had no merit. This is what Kirby and the others said from the White House. The Zionists totally ignored the rulings of the International Court of Justice. They're still sitting today in the United Nations. I mean, they should have been expelled even before the current crisis that exists now. So anyway, we want to open up for questions. I hope Dr. Noor, you'll be able to take questions, and Joe, Julia. Any questions or comments from the audience?
I had a question for Joe. Just the part about when you talked about Netanyahu and how he gave a victory speech. I don't know if you meant to put quotation marks around that, like, because it's very important that we don't take what the Zionists say as a victory to actually be a victory for them. You know, like, I think that's very important that we understand that we kind of have to take a step back and not take their rhetoric on what's going on as a thing. But I might just be like, implying from what you said, but yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, just really quickly, I do think that the Zionists scored a victory in Syria, and I think we have to be sober about the gravity of the situation. They took one of the highest peaks in the region. They've taken, almost 400 kilometers of land. Their tanks are sitting outside Damascus. I mean, this situation is a nightmare, and that's not to say all hope is lost, but this is, I think, in my opinion, a very critical moment. And I don't think calling it a victory necessarily legitimizes them, or but we have to be real about the severity of the moment. I think that this is a very critical moment for the entire region, the Syrian people, especially the resistance in Lebanon, and what happens in the coming months will be very crucial, for the future.
Hey, thank you for the great presentations. It was great to hear all of you. I know little was said about Russia and Iran in these presentations, and I know some people say that Iran is the next target, and I wondered what you feel about who is the next target and what role did Iran and Russia play in this whole thing. Thank you. That's the next full speech, I know, but.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's definitely the next target. So the Zionist entity now thinks that it has removed the main air defense barrier between itself and Iran. So now it thinks it has cleared the air, essentially. There's no air deterrence against striking Iran. And within Zionist media, they've made themselves clear that now they are, going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. So I think for any kind of deterrence or stability or even a chance at world peace, Iran needs the nukes like yesterday.
To just
straight to the point.
Just to add to that is it's obvious that the fall of the regime in Syria opens the box of tomatoes, if you will, rotten tomatoes in the area. And those who claim that they succeeded in their scheme are ready to expand, whether to Iran, which is not likely to be immediate, but main target is Iraq, actually. And Iraq and Syria, coincidentally, each had 13 years of sanctions. Each country, 13 years of sanctions until they brought it down. I mean, any Arab country is likely to be a target. Now that is Iraq, and then on the other hand is Jordan, because what's going on right now, you can see in the West Bank, the PA, Palestine, whatever it is called, Mahmoud Abbas and his group are more Zionist than the Zionists themselves. They opened their fight against the resistance in there to tell Trump that we are ready. Just give us the order. And that is what the order is. It is true that some of the resistance, like Hamas, part of Hamas actually, Khalid Mish'al and his group and what have you, they celebrated with whoever celebrated in Damascus, because they are short-handed, they do not see the coming of the future, and they adhere to their ideology of brotherhood. So there is lots of things. Look, the Zionist entity is the absolute evil, not only in the region, but in the world. That is why our stand should be firm that it should not exist, none whatsoever. And that is the liberation of Palestine.
Yeah, it's like the apartheid system in South Africa and Namibia. You know, you couldn't coexist with it. It had to be eliminated. And that's why, yeah, right. The ANC, SWAPO, the PLO, they were all allies, ZANU, PF, and Zimbabwe. Any other questions or comments?
Huh? Okay. So I wrote 7 questions. Give me a number between 1 through 7. 3. I got one. All right, 1, 2, 3. All right. Besides the coup and assuming Bashar is allegedly an evil dictator, what would be an appropriate way to transfer power to the people of Syria for a secular state? Okay, that was number 3. Number 4 is this bad timing? Number 5. It's hard not to see the liberation of Syria as a good thing. Oh wait, no, I didn't want to ask this one. Let's see. Number 1. Yeah, sorry, I keep saying number 1. Pick one. Okay. Maybe this is just pondering points. Who knows if they're supposed to have an answer. How important was Bashar al-Assad's leadership to the continuance of Palestinian resistance and Hezbollah resistance?
Look, the resistance in Palestine and other areas in the region started before Bashar al-Assad and started before even Iran. The people of the region started the resistance, and we have been there several times. Now we are, as I said in my presentation, This is a great setback for the resistance. But this is not the first time. We have been there before. We have been there in 1936, actually. And one of the great effect that brings us to this point is the inability of the Arab regimes to actually act or have a response to whatever happened. It is not now. It is from that period of time. Even the PA, the Mahmoud Abbas group, we had similar groups in 1936 in Palestine called the party, I forget what party was that, but it is a Nashashibi. They did form what they called the peace of brigades, peace brigades. And those peace brigades, business was to assassinate the leaders of the resistance. So we have been there. That is why I am saying that we are most likely the resistance will revive and even start in Syria. And this is, I stress on that. Syria, the Syrian people cannot accept the situation, none whatsoever. I have some news also because I follow the news minute by minute. There have been some incidents on the Ladiqiya area and so forth that armed groups attacked those rebels that were there, and they killed 15 of them. So that gives you indications of what the Syrian does. At the time of the French occupation, we had 3 states, and that is what the 3 stars on the flag that they adopted right now meant. 3 states, and the Syrian people did not accept that. They came together and they fought together, and they unite Syria in one piece. And that is most likely to happen again. True, it is a setback. So we cannot say anything else about it.
Wow. Hi, everyone. Okay. I actually hate speaking, and wow, there's a camera. Okay. I feel like it's a disservice not to speak when the topic of Syria comes up. But I want to acknowledge the fact that there's multiple truths that are correct at the same time in this specific situation. And the topic of Syria is so fresh because everything happens so quickly. So finding clarity in this chaos becomes difficult. And people are very quick to want to put forward what is the correct like analysis and thing, and then that creates more chaos and almost is like a propaganda push, and that is what is the first thing that is heard for someone who is already holding on to a truth in a moment of chaos. So I feel like that is really important to put into perspective, especially when we're talking to Syrians who are waiting up until the middle of the night so that they can speak to their family in the morning to make sure that they are still alive, that things are okay, because the situation is changing every moment, because chaos is chaos and the news is still the news and the media is still the way that it is. So understanding all the layers that are being fed to us to get back to the human layer that is very real right now is a lot. So people in this room that don't have a direct line at this moment to Syria, like understand that everything you are consuming is correct and incorrect at the same time. The political analysis that we got from these speakers, all correct, right? This is like liberation movements are not linear, right? So this can be taken both as a setback to the liberation movement and a victory to our Zionist like oppressors that we are like fighting against, right? And so this would, the main focal point for Syrian people right now are trying to figure out how to maintain unity in chaos and find that clarity, right? And being as people sitting here in the imperial core of the US, our focus should be how we maintain some type of unity here to like figure out how to deal with our oppressors that are oppressing our people. And that really is the bottom line in the chaotic moment until the dust settles. So I really want us to hold on to that. And I felt the need to say that out loud because I feel like we just keep getting divisive over these topics at the moment.
Thank you, Jessica. I need to warn everybody. Just because we have been as usual. We have been bombarded with lots of fabrications and lies, and people are eager to listen to those. So they capture this person, or they present this person, or where Assad money goes, and as if he was he took all the money of Syria out of Syria and so forth. This is the same thing they said about Saddam Hussein, they said about Gaddafi, and they said about even Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen and so forth. So please do not listen to these. I want to tell you that today there was a circulation of a letter that was supposed to be from Bashar al-Assad, President Bashar al-Assad. And he spelled out in that letter how he left Syria. He said basically that he went to Latakia, and from there he went to Hmimim, the Russian base, and all of a sudden Hmimim became under attack, and a military order came that everybody should evacuate Hmimim. So they evacuated, including us, and we ended up in Russia. And that is how he did not, supposedly, according to that, he did not, he even said that I did not leave when the time was much harder than it is today. How could I leave now? And that explains why he didn't even give a speech or said anything and what have you. So please be careful about the lies and things like that. So that's something is important to do.
Okay. Oh, okay, Kim.
Testing. Yeah, just wanted to ask real quick. When the Syria fell, when Assad left Syria, I read a couple of articles on the Guardian website, which is British news website, about the fall and what was involved. But anyway, I was wondering what the resistance group HDS, they were saying that they would be willing to cede control of Syria over to the current prime minister to just sort of help ease in the transition or whatever. But what I was wondering was, realistically, who would be, since they do have a prime minister now, who would realistically be taken over as the president now that Assad is gone? And do you think that there will be a realistically smooth transition, or is the U.S. just going to dump one of its puppets in there that'll be supported by the Zionists and whoever else has interest in Syria at the moment?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. I think that you know, the fact of the matter is, like, even if by some miracle among these tens of armed groups with different interests and backers and nationalities came together and picked someone to be the president of Syria, even having any kind of authority over the country is almost impossible right now, you know, because of the foreign occupation. I know people are floating Jolani as the, you know, next head of state for Syria. Some people are saying he might be a behind the scenes player. But it's important to note this guy is a Western puppet. He, you know, formerly led Jabhat al-Nusra, which was Syria's al-Qaeda branch. And then before that, he was a deputy to the leader of Daesh, ISIS, you know, and this guy is responsible for the slaughter of people, not just in Syria, but in Iraq and Lebanon, you know. And if you see, everybody's kind of taking a cautious approach, all the international players, even the resistance in Lebanon, Iran, they say basically, we'll see what Syria does. You know, words are one thing, we'll look for actions. The Iraqis are digging trenches along the border with Syria. They're placing artillery. They've got thousands of people mobilized. And I saw a general today in Iraq. He said, if they even come close to our border, we'll attack them. You know, so this is the delicacy of the situation. You know, how the delicacy. This is how delicate the situation is. And people, you know, you might speculate who's going to really be in charge, but you can see, you know, the people of the region already know and are preparing themselves, you know. But I think that, you know, there's a great potential for some kind of resistance to rise up in Syria. But I think it's very much in the interests of the United States, whoever, you know, I think they will be putting in Damascus, that no one has power to govern the whole country effectively.
The real power in Syria right now is in the hand of the Turkish government. And in fact, they sent their foreign minister to Damascus a couple of days ago. And they have their own problems too. They want Syria to be a stage where they can attack other nations. Now, Julani and his group can make decisions internally. I mean, to put this in this position, or to empty the central bank money, which they announced that today. They announced that they have 26 tons of gold in the central bank. So that is their limit, just to see the daily life needs of the people in Damascus and the surrounding. But the major political decisions are made in Istanbul and in Ankara, rather than in Damascus. So that's that, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that is that exactly, like, we have no sovereign state that is Syria at the moment right now. Like, now in the Turkish occupations in the north, and it has been in the north. It was a project centered in Idlib since the end of the ceasefire. And of course, we can go into a conversation of why frozen conflicts never work, because this helped Turkey and the US buy more time, and Israel to buy more time to conduct and plan this counter insurgent operation. The US is also at the same time trying to balance out its guarantees with the Kurds in the northeast, which, as Joe said, occupy 80 to 90% of the oil fields and the agricultural land. And Syria, for all of this time, even though it was in a worse situation over 10 years ago, what made it fall so fast, just within a matter of days, was the fact that, one, it was under the Caesar Act sanctions since 2019, which were drafted and masterminded by the Syrian Emergency Task Force, which is a CIA-funded, US-based lobby group that kind of masquerades as like a public interest group. I'm sure you guys have seen it on social media and stuff. They originally pushed to arm the so-called rebels in 2011, and they drafted and pushed the Caesar Act that ultimately crumbled Syria's economy. So Syria under Hafiz al-Assad instituted a plan for the storage of grain. There was the sovereign production of seeds in Syria for the longest time. But after the war, all of those reserves had depleted themselves. And this intersected right when the sanctions came. So of course, this is why this added insult to injury and contributing to the starvation of Syria, as well as the occupation of the US-backed Kurds who ended up putting like a lot of the bases there. And so right now, with the Zionist entity pretty much bombing to bits every military base, every site of the Syrian army and Syrian defense, so that there can never be, I mean, that's what they intend. They're for there to never be one, a state, but also two, for any defense, any kind of sovereign defense to be in the hands of resisting Arabs. So I don't think it's even possible at this moment of time to really talk about instituting any kind of transfer of power or position of power, because I think that in the sense of aiming to inflict a kind of long-term draining of Iran and of the resistance's energies and capabilities, they want Syria to be in perpetual chaos right now. They don't want any kind of leadership. They want it to be a Jolani-run hodgepodge of U.S. and Israeli and Turkish-backed groups just kind of scrambling and dividing for power, while the U.S. and kind of Turkey and the Zionist entity take more land and kind of benefit from this partition that gives Israel to the benefit in the south, where they're also encircling the borders of Lebanon from the east, the Bekaa Valley. And as I mentioned, Turkey in the north, where they've been instituting that project in Idlib that has spread now to the entire north, where they're circulating their currency and now winning people over with a few more hours of electricity. And the U.S. promised Kurdish project in the east, where their bases are. So Jolani has also made his targets clear, just as the HTS rebels have thanked Israel explicitly multiple times for their airstrikes in softening the ground for their counterinsurgency. Jolani has also said that, well, even though Israel's rolling its tanks into Damascus, they're not going to fight Israel. They have said that their targets are Iran and Hezbollah, which is what the U.S. and the Zionist entities' targets have been in the region in Syria for a long time. So this is the plan for Syria right now. We can't even really think about leadership at the moment.
Yes, and I think it's quite interesting that these people have not said the word Palestine once. These people who are supposed to be in power now in Damascus, they've said nothing about Palestine. The Zionists are bombing Syria, over 800 airstrikes just in the last week or so. And they say absolutely nothing about it. So it's clear, who's behind these people and what their objectives are. That's to destroy the burgeoning unity throughout the region, the international solidarity with Palestine. But they're late because you got the forces in Yemen, the Ansarullah, for example, that are continuing to strike the Zionist state, and others throughout the region are going to continue to fight to bring about the liberation of Palestine and the unity of the region. I want to thank everybody for coming. Just want to mention that Martin Luther King Day is coming up on January 20th. Please come out. Please encourage people to come out. There's an Eventbrite page. There's a Facebook page on January 20th at 8850 Woodward Avenue, St. Matthew, St. Joseph's Church. And also on February 1st, 12 noon. Also on February 1st, we have a fundraiser at the Detroit Repertory Theater on Gertrude Ma Rainey, the legendary vaudeville and blues artist. Tickets are $25. It's a fundraiser for the building. So please, if you have the money, please come out. So thank you so much for coming. And yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. If you got any donations for food, literature, it will be well appreciated. Thank you so much for coming.